I want to get some thoughts from Joshua Ritter. He's a criminal defense attorney, and also with us, Alex Capriello, our News Nation reporter, who's been on this case since the beginning. Joshua, as we listen to the prosecution lay out the timeline of this case, some of the digital evidence where Jose Ibarra's phone was at the time, the throwing away of clothes in the dumpster, they have really strong evidence as we've watched this case, but it seems as though she's meandering all over the place. What do you make of this closing argument at this point in the trial? And then secondly, what are you expecting the defense to say? We have not heard much from them.
I really have to applaud the impassioned argument that the prosecution is giving here, because she's presenting it really to an audience of one. It's not like she's got a panel of jurors in front of her and she's trying to convince all of them. It's just the judge that she's speaking to, but she's not taking anything for granted. It's easy also, I think, to give an impassioned, powerful closing argument when you have such convincing evidence. So she's walking through the evidence. You know, some of it's going to meander, I think, because she wants to make sure to include all of the different layers and facets of the evidence as they collected it. And what I mean by that is you've got physical evidence in the form of DNA, you've got digital evidence, you've got tracking evidence. So all of these things kind of play a role together in tracking who this person was. As far as what the defense is going to do, I think it's going to be another one of those, you know, this is circumstantial. They had everything the prosecution needed in this case, short of a confession and an eyewitness. And that's what the defense will highlight, is that there is no eyewitness. This is all, quote unquote, circumstantial.
Alex, as you've been in the courtroom and you've talked to some of the defense team involved in this case, their side of it was brief, but opening statements and now closing arguments will really paint the picture of what they think or cast doubt on Jose Ibarra as a suspect. What have you heard from that side?
Yeah, really, it's all about trying to point the finger at somebody, anybody else, and most notably, we've seen that finger being pointed at Diego Ibarra, Jose Ibarra's brother. The defense wanted to put him on the witness stand today, but because he has his own federal immigration sentencing that has to still happen, his lawyer advised him not to testify in order to, so that way he didn't incriminate himself. But really, what we saw during this rebuttal after the defense closed was the prosecution pushing back against that, and they were most successful by actually showing an FBI interrogation with Diego Ibarra. And in this moment, I believe it's a day or two after the murder occurred, this FBI is asking Diego Ibarra to look at the video surveillance that we've all seen now that shows the suspect taking bloody clothes and dropping them off in a dumpster. And in that video, Diego Ibarra, under the pressure, identifies his brother, Jose Ibarra, as being that person doing that act. They also showed him the video that's been tied to the peeping Tom charges before Laken Riley was killed. And that also was identified by Diego Ibarra as his brother, Jose Ibarra. So again, sort of the nail in the coffin, so to speak. This person that the defense is trying to point the finger at is going and under the pressure of the FBI, identifying his own brother as the person responsible.
And Joshua, how strong is some of the other circumstantial evidence, but the fingerprint on Laken Riley's phone, the scratches on Jose Ibarra that he cannot explain away? How has the defense argued that side of things?
I mean, you know, they've done about as good a job as I imagine they could put together, they could cobble together, given how strong this evidence is. When you've got DNA under the fingerprints of the victim, you've got a fingerprint from the defendant at the scene, you've got DNA from the victim on the defendant's clothing, which we can see him dispose of. This is a rock solid case. When I was a prosecutor, when you had a case like this presented only in front of a judge, we would refer to it as a long plea. And I essentially think that's what this is. This case has been marching towards one conclusion since its very beginning.
So what will the judge be factoring into his decision? And I do think it's pretty interesting as we observe the courtroom, how intently the judge is paying attention to these closing arguments and everything the prosecutors are saying.
I think rightfully so. I think the judge knows that the country is watching, that this is a case of great, cultural importance to people. And I think he knows, too, that he's going to have to give some sort of reasoning behind his verdict. So I think he's doing an admirable job of making sure that he's presenting a fair attitude and allowing both sides to give their arguments and his attention to both sides. But I think, end of the day, we're not going to be waiting days for a verdict here. I imagine we will probably hear something within hours after closing arguments concluding.
Alex, I think that as we have watched this case, many of these murder cases are difficult to hear as we monitor them from afar, but this one particularly so. The heinous nature of the murder, and to see and hear Laken Riley's family and friends inside that courtroom and some of the images and her final moments being played before them. I don't think we can, any of us, put into words how horrible this must be for them. Tell us what the reaction from the gallery has been throughout this trial, and probably the hope that it soon will be over.
Yeah, we've seen day in and day out Laken Riley's family and friends attend this hearing and this trial in person, which says a lot about their courage and strength in this moment. They want to see justice served, but they're also willing to sit through some of the most gruesome and graphic details possible about how their daughter and their friend was murdered. They have at times had to get up and excuse themselves from the courtroom with the information that's raining down on them simply too much to bear. But we've seen the judge, the prosecutor, and the defense take their needs into consideration. For example, at times when crime scene photographs, videos, or body camera video was playing, at times they decided not to elect to display it to the entire gallery, but instead display it on personalized monitors that sit in front of the judge, sit in front of the witness, the prosecution, and the defense in order to sort of protect the people that are all around here. But yeah, I've sat through many criminal trials that have gruesome details, and the Laken Riley case is certainly at the top of the list when it comes to the graphic nature of the information that we've heard over the last 4 days.
Joshua, one other thing that the prosecution has leaned into is the predatory nature of this crime. How might that factor into the judge's decision?
You know, this judge is very seasoned. He's probably seen it all, crimes of this kind of violence and magnitude. But with any case like this, where it's a nightmare, it's a completely innocent person doing a completely innocent act, going out for a jog. This judge, I imagine, is being affected by that on an emotional level like any of us are watching. I mean, hearing the testimony of the frantic text messages and phone calls from her mother as she was searching for her is something that any person, especially a parent, can place themselves in and imagine that nightmare. To have lived through that, as seasoned as this judge is, I can't imagine that won't have an impact on him.
Yeah. You cannot put emotions aside when you know the details as horrific as this. Joshua Ritter, Alex Capriello, to you both, thank you. We're going to continue to listen to these closing arguments in court in Athens, and the judge will soon decide Jose Ibarra's fate.